Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. How's everybody doing today? How are we feeling?
Happy.
Good.
Yeah, it's
I'm like
hot.
on my second cup of green tea, so I am lit up.
Lit up green tea. I wish 2 cups of green tea would get me lit up anymore. I think I have a problem.
I will not be getting any sleep tonight.
Oh no, I could do the caffeine and lay down and go to sleep. That may indicate that I have a problem. Maybe
I can fall asleep, but I don't stay asleep if I drink caffeine like after 6 o'clock. So
that's a good point. Yeah, never thought of it that way.
Yeah,
now that
I fall asleep too quickly, which I'm told is a bad sign that you should not fall asleep within 3 seconds of your head hitting the pillow.
Based on what? Who was telling you that?
That's like a health indicator that you're you're overly
exhausted
exhausted.
Passing out.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you also feel signs of exhaustion throughout the day?
There's a little light going off on the side of your eye that says low battery, and you're just like, oh.
Because I don't think that the falling asleep is the main concern.
What are you talking about?
Do you see any black vultures while you are falling asleep?
Well, sometimes, but no, you're not supposed to do that. Apparently, does anybody else twitch really bad when they fall asleep? Like, has anybody ever told you that like you?
I do the.
I have those like sleep jerking kind of thing.
Yes.
You know, like the falling thing. Yeah.
But some people some people it's like a little twitches, and then some people it's like violent.
I don't know.
I think. Apparently, I'm a violent sleep twitcher.
That doesn't surprise me.
In your sleep.
You wake yourself up.
That's sort of like your waking state, so I would expect it to be the same. It's your sleeping state.
Yeah. If there's a set of options from mild and chill to extreme and intense,
Bruce Lee,
you're probably going to choose option D in this case.
Violence is the answer.
Yeah.
There's sleep terrors and then there's sleep fighting.
Yeah.
I'm not scared of anything ever.
I think of it as
when I'm awake.
That is, I realized the other day what is kind of always my answer to something. If somebody gives me a weird look, I'm like, "You want to fight?" Like, and I was like, "That's not usually the best thing to say."
Yeah, but, you're lucky that my head just hit the pillow 3 seconds ago, or you'd be in trouble right now.
Listen. In your genetic background, fight or flight, there is no flight, Alexis. There's no flight.
Know.
There's
Well, it depends. Am I having to call someone for my own personal things? Because in that case, I'm like, I ain't doing it. Like if I live my life, I can call all day long, call people I've never met, never heard from, and be like, "Hi, I'm Alexis. Let me help you with your tomatoes," which is what we're talking about today, and we will get to eventually. But if you ask me to call and make a doctor's appointment, I'm like, I'm good. I don't think.
I'll get to that when there's a problem.
I don't think I actually need to go to the doctor. They're like, "No, but like your leg is falling off." I think I'm okay. Like it's fine.
It's fine. It's just an allergic reaction.
When I think of sleepy, I think of the articles and news stories that come out around Thanksgiving time for tryptophan. Right.
Yeah.
And we sort of casually disguise blood sugar crashes after an enormous meal as must be the tryptophan that made me so sleepy.
It's all that turkey I ate.
Yeah, it's that
9 pounds of stuffing that I really ate.
Nothing to do with the 18 rolls I stuffed in my face.
The A1C roller coaster I was just on, nothing to do with what's happening right now with this sleepiness. But another chemical that I feel like has gotten a lot of press and cred across time has been lycopene.
Yeah.
Ooh,
it's in ketchup.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's in ketchup. That's why I drink a bottle a day.
What is ketchup made of, Josh?
Good vegetables only.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tomatoes.
And
a little vinegar and salt for, to bring out the flavor of the tomato.
Yeah, from the family that gave you some poisons. The nightshade.
And it's good company, potato.
Comes one of America's very favorite in the top levels of consumption as far as the vegetables that Americans consume. I believe it's tomatoes, lettuce, and then potatoes.
Wow.
The order may have
Potato.
changed over time, but if you're thinking what you're looking at there, you got maybe a salad or a hamburger, but you got ketchup, you got tomato sauce, you got I already said ketchup, so I love it. Fries, baked potato. But today we're talking about the number one, the red beating heart of the American vegetable palette.
Definitely
The
of the
tomato.
garden. Yeah.
It is in the garden. It is.
Yeah.
And
'Cause
just
nobody-
about it.
I can't tell the difference between homegrown tomatoes and the ones from the store.
You lie.
It depends on if the ones at the store came from a local source.
I was trying to get you guys, but
You lie.
He only goes to that grocery store that has homegrown tomatoes. He's one of those guys. So it's true.
Mm-hmm.
It is tomato
the
season
Latin
now.
term is gentrifier.
That's it. That's the one.
So
tomatoes are going right now. Yeah, they're going.
Yeah, we know that you all have. Well, hopefully you're listening to this, and if you plan on growing a tomato, you are currently growing a tomato because it is the middle of tomato season. So for most people, or middle beginning, depending on where you're at in the state. But so we just thought we'd hit on some things that you may be running into at this stage, because tomatoes are typically really easy when you get them started. They grow really quickly. Although my husband is growing his very first tomato plant this year in a pot, and every day he goes and looks at it and he goes, "It's not doing anything." I'm like,
tomatoes they're a lot harder to grow in containers. I mean, they can be hard to grow, especially depending on what your medium is.
He's got like 5 tomatoes on it. It's doing well.
Okay.
And he every time he looks at it, he goes, "It just looks wilty." And I'm like, "Honey, that's the way tomatoes look." Like,
physiological leaf roll.
That way. No,
have you gotten an idea of where his reference is? Like a Disney plant singing or something?
Salsa.
You just looked at a bunch of clip art of tomato plants.
I think so. Honestly,
it's not smiling at me, Alexis. It needs to go to the
engineer
dentist.
brain is like, I see no numbers on the plant. So
no gears. There's no motors. I can't hear the engine running. I don't
understand what data points you're giving me right now.
What variety or sort of type of variety did he start out with?
Well, that's the fun part. We don't know, because it was a sprout that came out of my high tunnel that I've never grown tomatoes in before.
Wow.
So I said, "Hey, look, there's a tomato coming up." And this was in, I don't know, November or something like that. And I said, "Look, there's a tomato coming up." And he was like, "Oh, can I keep it?" And so he dug it up, and he's been babying it throughout this, winter in the greenhouse. And but
fruiting.
I think it's going to be a
cool.
pretty big one. Like, I think it's going to be, like a small,
not like a cherry tomato
size. No, it's not a cherry. I was really surprised. So I'll post photos when we know what it is.
Well, with that sort of virgin birth story, maybe you should save the seeds and take them to town and trade them for a cow or something.
Yeah,
cow, giant.
These are my magic tomato seeds.
Exactly.
The heirloom, the tomato swap people are pretty serious when they go to swap seeds. I mean, if you've ever been to a seed swap where they were swapping tomatoes, those people take that very seriously. So,
Ray, you said one of the H words. So maybe that's a point of orientation in case folks aren't familiar with the general types of tomatoes. You have hybrids and you have heirlooms.
Yeah,
or open pollinated and hybridized.
Yeah,
or something.
Yeah, and there's sometimes a long history of people that will save their favorite varieties, and I think of green beans and tomatoes come to mind first when I think of people that seed save. And we kind of were joking earlier a few minutes ago that tomatoes are all the same, commercial tomatoes versus home tomatoes. Well, the interesting thing is there are differences in tomatoes, even beyond like the heirlooms versus non-heirlooms. But the older varieties of tomatoes typically were selected first and foremost for their, purpose. First of all, fresh eating or canning, but more than anything, flavor, not shipping quality. And that's not to knock commercially bred tomatoes bred for commercial purposes, but tomatoes are something that the way that they're shipped and packaged, they have to have a pretty thick wall. So commercial varieties are selected for that just as much as they are for anything else. And that's not a bad thing. That's not to say you can't get a good, quality eating tomato, but there definitely is a difference to me in the heirloom varieties that have they're thin skinned, thin-walled, very fleshy, very juicy in a lot of cases, depending on if you're talking about like a Cherokee Purple or an Ox Heart, all of these awesome heirlooms that people love, but they were selected for the eating quality first and foremost, not for shipping long distances. And thank goodness, we have tomato varieties that you can ship long distances.
Mm-hmm.
I can have a tasty tomato in the middle of wintertime. So I'm not going to knock that, but I'm going to tell you that my preference for eating tomatoes will be some of those varieties that were developed first and foremost for home use. So yeah, heirloom tomatoes, they have a long history in home gardens, and there's a lot of considerations we can talk now, because I typically I don't know about you guys, but I start to get a lot of calls this time of year, for diseases and some different problems with tomatoes that tend to show up now. But heirloom tomatoes, we get a higher percentage of calls from those because some of those don't have the disease resistance packages built in. Remember, we're talking about heirlooms. They tend to be older bred seeds. So you have to treat those a little bit differently sometime. But I do love my heirloom tomatoes, Brett. Do love them. Yes.
Well, Alexis, I think you're probably the, what is it, CPD, the chief plant dork of the podcast.
I am flattered. Thank you so much for that.
Congratulations on the new title that we just made up.
CPD.
And it finally made it to the C-suite, baby. So can you just give us a sort of brief distinction between the open pollinated, AKA, or overlapping with heirloom, versus some of the hybrid stuff? I mean, you talk about you found a seed. If you found a seed from an heirloom plant versus from a hybrid plant, there might be more of a dice roll in one case or the other. Can you just give us just a short orientation to that? Because I hear that a lot, and sometimes I wonder if I know or even other people know what it means.
Yeah, and Ray, if I misspeak or don't fully educate, feel free to jump in here. But so yeah, heirlooms are typically something that can be crossed, and a lot of our hybrids have come from heirloom breeding, basically. So we don't. I think a lot of people get the word like hybrid confused with GMO, and I know we've talked about that on here before, so I'm not going to go like super deep into those types of things. But tomato hybrids are just natural, or not. It's not natural selection, it's human selection. So we've been doing that for thousands of years. But with our hybrids now, if you take a seed out of that hybrid plant, it's most likely that seed is going to come back as the plant that it was. Where with an heirloom, if you've got a ox heart right next to a pink brandywine, the way the flowers are set up, there's potential for bees to cross. Most tomatoes are self-pollinating naturally, just the way the flower is arranged, but there's a lot more likelihood of those being able to cross. And so then if you get seed from the tomato on your pink brandywine, that seed is the child of that pink brandywine, and it could be the offspring of your oxbow and your pink brandywine combined. So and that's kind of like the open pollinated is the same thing. But tomatoes, for the most part, which is why saving seed for them is really popular, are self-pollinating. You do get, like I said, some bumblebees that'll just like buzz about, and they're like, oh, this looks good, and they put their big old selves in there and do that. But the flowers for the most part are, which is why I think there's such a culture around.
They're going to come back true to type no matter what. That's one thing about heirlooms, is they generally, in almost any instance I can think of, if it's a true heirloom, what we call an heirloom, which can be kind of a vague term, but because the way that it is pollinated, it will come back true to type year after year, very consistent.
But you could do your own breeding of them if you wanted to, where you can go in and, you're like, I really like the traits of this weird heirloom over here. I'm going to cross it with, this one over here because this one has good fruit, but this one has disease resistant. And you could, do your own little breeding program. And you go back to, what was that guy's name with the peas? The
unit.
Johnny Peasy.
The genes. Talks about genes, and he bred peas.
Mendel, that's what John
Mendel, yeah.
The Punnett square.
The Punnett square. You can go back to your Punnett square and be doing stuff like that. But we've done an episode where we talk about that a little bit more. So if that interests you, or shoot us a message and we can go more into detail. I just don't want people to freak out about hybrid. I hear that a lot. People are like, oh, I can't have hybrids. It's like, no, it's like no different than your golden
No.
doodle. Like
Natural hybridization occurs like sweet corn, like in corn in your garden. If you have 2 or 3 varieties, it's going to hybridize itself. You have sweet corn on one side, yellow on the other, then you're going to come up with Indian corn mysteriously. If you save the seed. So some of those things, they can cross between different parentage. So yeah.
But bottom line, if you were to have a tomato that maybe you got from a home center or something, or it's just a hybrid tomato, if you were to save the seed from that tomato, it's a little bit of a dice roll on what the offspring of that tomato would end up being. So it would almost be like if you had your golden doodle and you had 2 golden doodles and they had puppies, some of the puppies are going to be golden retrievers, some of them are going to be poodles, and some of them are going to be golden doodles. And so it's just a little bit more of a dice roll on that. That's all. So it's a long game to save a seed from a plant and then plant it and then hope, and then you get these little tiny tomatoes that was the let's just say the father plant that had really good disease resistance but terrible fruit characteristics.
Right.
And so that kind of opens the door for, like, I guess why it is that we don't do some of the hybridization and some of the breeding in the first place. And it opens it up to every time that I have grown tomatoes, whether it was for myself or for wages, I just think you would be nothing without me. You wimpy, needy, delicate. I mean, and that's what they've done. They've bred these plants to grow amazing fruit, and everything else they are helpless.
Yeah.
I mean, helpless.
Totally.
And the more you move into the open pollinated heirloom stuff, it's even more as far as disease resistance. They have to be trellised, they have to be pruned, they have to, all these things that have to be done. But anyway, tomatoes, while amazing, delicious, peak of the season, picked ripe, man, hard to beat that natural flavor. But they have a lot of issues. And so those tuning in may be having a variety of those issues now. What are some of those?
It's kind of like a catch-22. Yeah, they produce a lot, but they have a lot of issues. Yeah.
Well, I think of it as like they have like a lot of Habsburg type problems, right? A lot of severe inbreeding.
If they could pee, it would be blue.
Well, I think that some of the ones that a lot of people talk about or notice that they think are disease or insect issues are actually physiological disorders. So they're abiotic and caused from something like not watering enough, not the right nutrients. One that I've already seen this year with my high tunnel growers. Well, I saw earlier in the season for people who put them in super early. They see a lot of what we call cat facing. And so if you're not familiar with that, it's just these weird, it's usually on the bottom of the tomato, which is the blossom end, the opposite side is the stem. And it's this kind of these weird little holes, and it looks like some
like
scarring.
Holes and folds, kind of.
Folds,
it's like
It's
like a cat
lines
making
like
a
whiskers.
cruddy face. Yeah.
Yes. True. So, but cat facing, so it's usually caused by poor pollination, which I think is what people don't think about. And so that poor pollination, even though tomatoes are mostly self-pollinating, so we don't typically see problems if it's too hot or too cold, like if there's severe drought conditions, because they're divas,
we see
right?
that a lot in the cool springs.
Yeah,
Cat facing's
those
real
high
prevalent.
tunnels, those early growers see it, but you'll see it also in July when it's 100 degrees. That you get poor pollination. And so what that means is that those seeds, the little ovaries in there, they don't get pollinated. And so then those seeds don't develop. And so then therefore the tomato, the outside actual fruit part of it that protects those seeds in there doesn't develop around anything. So you get these weird folds and holes because there's no seeds in there for it to develop around. And so we see that a lot. And there's really, most of the time it's that you haven't done anything. Sometimes, maybe you need to water more consistently, but most of the time it's not your fault. It's nature. And there's only so much you can do to control that. So
what should I spray for the blossom end rot that I'm getting?
He's baiting me because
water,
most likely nothing. Water. Unless the only exception is if you're growing in a pot or a raised bed with like potting soil in your raised bed, so it's not a natural soil environment, that's the only scenario where I will tell you that you might need calcium in the
Oh,
soil,
so
not
can you
on the
paint a
plant.
picture of what blossom end rot looks like for me?
Yeah. Yeah. So blossom end rot is the opposite side of the stem because that's where the blossom was. And basically, what happens is the plant does not uptake enough calcium. And so cells do not form properly. And then a secondary rot comes in. So the problem is that is holes formed because there's no cells to make them, they're not strong. And then because there's a weak spot, you can get any kind of fungus that comes in there and, makes it look weird and it's rotten on the bottom side. So if you ever picked a tomato and it looks beautiful and you flip it over and it's got a rotten spot on the bottom, that's blossom end rot.
And you don't get calcium movement in a plant. It's one of those interesting scenarios. No water movement directly equals no calcium movement in a plant necessary for the cell
It's a
walls. So we
non-mobile.
see this from uneven watering. Either you go through a boom and bust cycle. We see that a lot in unirrigated home gardens that have a natural fluctuation in water availability. And that's what it boils down to in most situations in a home garden where we see a lot of that. Blossom end rot is the calcium will be present in the soil, but because there's this uneven uptake of water, the calcium, the molecule can't move into the plant through the plant. It's heavy, it's hard to move around, it has to be moved with water. And the most extreme part of the plant is the blossom end. That's the farthest point. And unfortunately, the farthest point is where the fruit is. That's what we want in the plant. And so we have this rot that sets in. So to correct that, you guys nailed it. Is good even watering throughout the growing season, and most home gardeners can alleviate that because most of our soils have an adequate amount of calcium, but we don't have
In
adequately
Kentucky.
even watering. In
Yeah.
Kentucky, now, if you're talking about more sandy soils, Josh, I know some of you guys have experience in soils that's not the case. Probably in other parts of the country, there may legitimately be there commercially. There's some concerns there with Hart's ratios and lack of calcium or growth rates. There's some other issues, but for home gardens in Kentucky, we typically we start talking about water schedules first and foremost. Now, if you're talking about raised beds, it's even a different issue than that because I think that blossom end rot in raised beds is a lot worse for tomatoes. And it can actually be watering and
calcium.
an issue with calcium and pH.
Because there's no native soil. So, adding lime or.
We're seeing a ton of that this time of year in July. That's one of our most common phone calls will be raised beds with blossom end rot.
On your peppers as well. I know we're talking about tomatoes, but peppers, any of those solanaceous crops, you can get blossom end rot on pretty good.
Is cracking one that you all get calls about too?
Yeah.
Like as a similar,
what is that?
Watering,
cracking.
Oh yeah,
like
rough shoulders and cracking, and that relates to what the uneven watering too. Boom and bust. Well, there's radial cracks and then there's linear cracks, and both equal the same thing. They can either go around the stem or radiate out from the stem, and both are from the same thing.
Yeah, cracking is like really fast growth, so it's like stretch marks. So for your plant, that's an easy way to think about it. So if you're going through drought and then you get a ton of rain for a week, those tomatoes will crack because they're growing so quickly because they've kind of had this boom and bust situation. But yeah, that's one I see a lot, and there's again nothing you can do about it, which is both sometimes a relief, but also sometimes very frustrating. Is zippering, which is not like people still sell these plants at or these things at farmers market, but if you're one of those who needs like a perfect tomato, zippering, kind of exactly what it sounds like, is where you get this sort of scar line, and it's usually from where the stem is all the way down to the bottom, and it's just this line of like callus. It kind of looks like a zipper that forms, and that is it's botanically that the anther, which is the part of the flower, which is the male part that contains the pollen, it gets stuck, and so as the fruit grows, it just kind of creates this scar basically because it gets stuck, and the only thing you can do about that is pick a variety that doesn't tend to get stuck. So you didn't do anything wrong. So if it makes you feel better, if you're getting that, but it's usually not a big deal. You can still eat them. That's the other thing, is people are always worried, like, well, can I eat this? Yeah. If it's a little rotten spot, cut it out. You're going to be fine to eat a tomato that has some scars on the outside.
So one subtle thing that Alexis mentioned earlier, and I just want to hammer home in case we have folks who are newer to this or exploring. She mentioned this crazy word starting with S, solanaceous. So
Mm.
and this is something we talked about before. We covered cucurbits a couple of episodes back. Cucurbits being a family of plants like cucumbers and melons, etc. So another thing that a lot of times plant people, and I, as a non-plant person who has become more of a plant person, I had to learn this. They talk about plants in families because a lot of times they share common characteristics. And so within that solanaceous family, also known as the nightshade family, you have things like tomatoes, but you also have things like peppers and eggplants and morning glory and a variety of other, different plants. And they tend to be heavier feeders. They tend to be, I think of them a lot of times as like the heat of summer crops or the, peak of summer crops. There are, interestingly, some people who have specific nightshade allergies within the family, which I think I've met the first person that I've known, and I've come across a couple other people. And so that's just something in case there's folks who are orienting themselves to this world of horticulture. Plant families there's not there are a lot of them, but there's not a ton of common ones. And so as you hear people say that like, peas and beans are in the same family, for instance, and then you'll get to the point where you're like, start pulling in really obscure things that are in the same family, and you're like, did you know that this is actually in the blah, blah, blah
Asteraceae?
Oh,
Everything's an
Yeah.
Asteraceae.
yeah. Guess that first if you're on Jeopardy.
It's a composite.
Did you know that
Yeah.
pineapple and Spanish moss are in the same family? You
Oh.
can't eat them both.
I mean,
Would not try.
you can try. You can eat them both
Not
at least
recommended.
once.
One of them won't taste good. I'll give you that.
Okay.
Another thing I get a lot this time of year, it seems like every year, is white flesh. Alexis, do you get a lot of calls on that where you have an inclusion inside the tomato? On the outside, it's perfect.
Oh, yeah.
But you have white flesh on the inside.
It's like a corky. It literally is going to be white, and the rest of your tomato is red. And it's like a corky.
Yes, and get that call every year. And you can cut around that and salvage some of the tomato, but it is annoying. But that goes back to a couple things: inconsistent water levels and temperature fluctuations. And if you see a theme here developing where tomatoes don't like these radical temperature fluctuations, you would be correct. And that causes the flesh to do odd things, and it expresses itself as white flesh on the inside of the tomato. But now there is some confusion with white flesh condition, which is on the inside of the tomato. It's harmless. And stink bug damage. Now, stink bug damage, if you look careful at your tomato, you'll actually see stink bug damage that we're seeing this time of year. On the outside of the tomato, you can actually see the white there where the stink bug feeding causes the plant to have a reaction, and it causes a rotten spot to eventually develop. But it starts out as a cloudy area. That's the best way I can describe it. It's cloudy, but if you look at this cloudy area on the outside of the tomato really close, you'll always see a little needle-like brown point where the feeding occurred with the stink bug. But that's the difference between stink bug damage, which is cloudy. You can see it on the outside. The difference between that and white flesh. And I see both of those this time of year, and I've seen people confuse the two, but they're caused by two different things. But that's really common for me to take that call and kind of go through that with growers. Are those two things?
So speaking of kind of like flesh disorders and stuff, or flesh problems within tomatoes.
Can we? I think that's the name of the episode. Flesh disorders.
Flesh disorders.
Yeah.
It should get lots of hits.
And then tomatoes in parentheses.
And I know we don't want to get too off track with like insect pests, but have either of y'all seen the silver leaf whitefly thing? I haven't seen that with my own eyes. I've just seen pictures, but it's very wild. Like, so if you cut your tomato in half, it'll be ripened on one part and completely green on the other part.
Yeah.
Kind of wild.
Injects
related to that, but it's not as demarcated is like if you use too much nitrogen early in the season, you get uneven ripening, which is not as pronounced as what you're talking about, Josh. We get a lot of calls on uneven ripening where you get these odd sections of the tomato, some's turning, some's not, which is high nitrogen early season. You don't want to do that. You don't want to overcook the nitrogen, usually low potassium, high nitrogen. But now what you're talking about is even more pronounced than that.
Yeah, it's like green versus red.
Yeah.
Sounds like a marketing opportunity where you can have fragrant tomatoes and a BLT.
There you go.
all with one.
Totally. I mean, you get a
one
couple of
package.
good red
making some
slices, and
lemonade.
then fry the
Mhm.
rest.
There you go.
You
That
got it.
uneven ripening, that's a big issue some years and usually I'll do some investigation and they've applied nitrogen 4 times in a natural soil garden before the first tomatoes on there. And I'm like, probably too much nitrogen
Mhm.
or delayed ripening. Both can happen if you have too much
If
nitrogen.
if
But
all
yeah.
if all these problems are overwhelming you with like, oh wow, there's like a million
Mhm.
and one things that could go wrong with tomatoes.
Mhm.
I told you so. They would be nothing without me. But
Divas.
Nothing.
There is a really cool publication from the University of Kentucky, ID 172, which is an
Mhm.
IPM scouting
Mhm.
guide for common pests of solanaceous crops in Kentucky.
It's
Mhm.
That is
awesome.
really, really good.
Yeah, that's a
It's
good one.
like, wow, this is
Tremendous
the type of stuff that
photos.
we
Great
can do.
pictures, if
Yes.
you're
Mhm.
like, I don't
Yeah.
know if this is what cat facing looks like.
Yeah, what the difference
Here's
between
a great
curling
picture.
and curling and wilting
Fusarium will,
and
yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
Those types of things. It's a really cool one. So ID 172 is what that one is, and
Yeah.
they have a whole list of other scouting guides for cucurbits and sweet corn and cole crops and
Sweet
brambles and all of the
potatoes.
other
It's
fun
a good
stuff.
one.
So yeah, just shout out to the IPM team, the Integrated Pest Management team at UK for putting those out.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love the pictures. That's a really good one.
That's
We were
yeah.
talking about flesh disorders and keeping with Josh's theme. Sunscald, which is kind of sometimes it can be easy to confuse that with things like blossom end rot,
Mhm.
stink bug damage, things like that. But usually with sunscald, which you get a lot of calls in July, is just simply if you have a thin canopy, if you've grown a certain variety of tomato that doesn't have good leaf cover, too much
If you
sun's getting
over
to the
suckered,
tomato. If you
Mhm.
over suckered, did not leave enough canopy, yeah, that's a good
so
one,
you
Alexis.
should stop suckering. What usually we say for most varieties like July 1st. So if you're still doing
Yeah,
that, stop.
And you're
yeah.
saying suckering, so I was assuming that you meant that, like at the doctor's office, they told me that those are just for kids. You can't have them anymore.
No more suckering,
Or
Brad.
like
No more suckering.
waiting and hiding, and then the tomato comes around the corner and you bust it in the
Yeah,
tummy.
boom,
Suckered.
cheap
There
shot.
you
Uh,
go, sucker.
What is suckering, or like if you were gonna orient someone to go and figure out more, is there something in ID 128 or something like that? What
Yeah,
is
there
it?
are.
What
I
are we
would
talking
say
about?
that me saying it over a podcast is not going to be as clear as a graphic will be.
Mhm.
But it's basically these extra shoots that the tomato sends out that are unnecessary, and you want it to focus on fruit production. And so you will just, pinch those out or cut those out, depending on what size they are, early in the season. So
Yeah.
you go, hey, I want fruit, get it together. I don't want leaves, I want fruit. And then by July, we start leaving those on mostly because of the sun scald and because we've kind
Yeah.
of we've pushed it for fruit, and now we need those leaves to start coming back so we get fruit throughout the rest of the summer.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
suckering's it's an awesome, not only for sunscald, that's a kind of an environmental consideration. It's I love to sucker in my home garden. I realize in a big commercial operation you would have a hard time suckering, but I remove the bottom leaves from most of my plants, the very most bottom leaves,
yeah.
because they're almost like I've heard it been described as they're going to be shaded, so they're like unproductive workers that are being pruned. That was kind of harsh, but they're
Who are
unproductive
also
leaves.
hanging out really close to the tuberculosis ward that is the soil
Uh,
surface.
That's it. Good analogy. Let's bring it on
Tuberculosis
home.
ward. Okay.
We
Yeah, I don't
went
know.
there.
I
That's
wanted it
it.
to feel dire.
It's an infirmary. It's an infirmary. But I love the suckering just to thin the lower, to get as much
Yeah.
foliage off the soil as possible. To thin the plant, I don't know, sucker 2 or 3 nodes up and then just stop whenever that happens. Not to get into the upper canopy, but it's going to be shaded, non-productive, and the energy of the plant's going to go there where we don't want it. But now, late in the season, there's 2 kinds of tomatoes: ones that have disease and one's going to get disease. I'm looking
Mhm.
at you, early blight. But that's a common phone call. But it all starts with a lot of those low hanging leaves with
Mhm.
soil-borne pathogens that get rain splash on them, then ladder up. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned suckering. It is an important, for many standpoints in the home garden, specifically for disease control and for things like sun scald. Yeah,
Well, and
it's a good
isn't it
one.
true that it's only indeterminate that you're suckering? Which maybe we
Yes,
should
that's
talk
a
about
great,
that.
yeah, Josh, that's right. On determinate varieties or patio style, yeah, we don't sucker those. Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that.
A lot of hybrid tomatoes are determinate, which means kind of they grow to a determined height. So
Mhm.
they're a bush style. Sometimes you hear those called. A lot. This isn't universally true, but a lot of the heirlooms and open pollinated tend to be indeterminate,
Yeah.
which means that in theory, given the right conditions, they could grow to an indeterminate length. They could
They
grow
just
to. That's how I
keep
remember it, at
going.
least.
Do it. Yeah, yeah. No.
And so they're vining, and so like the ones that are the bush style, they still need to be trellised to some extent, but they
Yeah.
have at least some
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
The indeterminates are literal vines, and if you do nothing, they will grow out and sprawl all over the place and be in contact with the soil. It'll be a big mess, and so that you'll see them trellised up.
It can also tell you something, and there's always, plants that break the rules, but it can also tell you something about the way the fruit sets. And so
Mm.
people who like to can, right, they want a lot of product all at one time, and then they're kind of done with it, right? For the most part, that would be a determinate tomato, because it kind of knows how big it's going to get, and then it will set majority of its fruit kind of all within the same window
Yeah.
of time, versus indeterminate, because it doesn't know when it's going to quit. It's going to keep going until something makes it.
Slow and
It's
steady trickle.
Yeah, it's going to
Yeah.
bring in a slower amount of tomatoes over a period of
I know
time.
the
So
tomato canneries love the ones that just
Mhm.
all come off at one time, then they just
Mhm.
mow everything down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So just something to think about. That way, if you're like, I had so many tomatoes and then I got none, and it's a bush tomato, that could be why.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of
Yeah. If
people will see
if
that.
you're looking to have a BLT a couple of times a week, you might want to get an indeterminate tomato where it's kind of
Mhm.
trickling out gradually over time. If you're looking
Yeah.
to,
Go hard on salsa, like all at once.
just 5 gallons of salsa in 1 week.
Mhm.
Just go. I'm talking about eating, not making,
Oh,
or
well, same.
making and eating.
Yeah.
But the determinants. Yeah.
Seems like
Do you all have a favorite tomato peak season tomato product
Oh,
dish?
like
product?
a
I
dish.
I just want to slice it
Mm.
all up and put it on a plate, and it's got to be cold. It's got to be a cold tomato, and I know you're not supposed to put your tomatoes in the fridge, but I want it because it's hot outside. So a cold
Mm.
tomato with a lot of salt and a little bit of cayenne pepper.
Mm.
Chef's kiss.
I would do tomato sandwiches, just some mayo, good mayo,
Mm,
good mayo. Insert your brand here, and just a big Oxheart tomato, sliced thick. Put it on bread with some mayo. I'm done.
mhm,
I also do love a tomato pie too. I usually make those because at that point in July, this point that we're in, you have so many tomatoes because you're an awesome
mhm.
gardener. Um, you're trying to figure out inventive ways to
I've
use
only
up all
made
of your
one
tomatoes.
once, and it
I like
was
tomato pie.
I don't think I let them dry out enough, so it was a little too soggy, and the texture was a little weird, but the flavor was good.
Yeah, yeah. It's the ingredient list is rather weird if you've never made a tomato pie, but I do enjoy eating those,
Mhm.
especially by people that are better at making them than I am. So yeah,
Mm.
tomato pie. Yeah. How about you
My
guys, Josh, Brett?
Sorry, was the question more like what do we like to eat with tomatoes, or what tomatoes do we like to make things out of?
Yes.
No. What's the? Well, I was asking more about the
both.
dish rather than
I
the
see, I
varietal
see.
or
Well, you should
application.
go first, Brett, because I need to remember
Brett's got
how
something in
this thing is
mind. I
spelled.
can see him cooking over there.
Watch me cook.
Watch him cook. Watch him cook.
I don't know. I was trying to think. Maybe I was looking
Yeah.
to you all for
Some fresh
inspiration.
pico. Oh, some fresh pico is
I
Yeah.
good.
do love
Yeah.
salsa. I do
Yeah.
love we make pizzas pretty often.
Mhm.
And some fresh tomato on pizza can be a different kind of mix it
Mhm.
up type vibe.
Yeah.
A light tomato sauce.
Mhm.
Or sorry, not lightly cooked tomato
Mhm.
sauce can be really nice. You got to get
I
some of
guess
that
we make it
liquid out.
something like that. I call it just garden reduction. It's squash and everything that's in the garden with a tomato base. Put it in a
Mhm.
skillet and just cook it down into
Mhm.
a sauce and let it just reduce over low heat. And then just put that over pasta. No matter what I throw in there, zucchini, summer squash,
Mm.
tomatoes, whatever, onions that I kind of caramelize beforehand, and then just put it over. And it's
Mm.
really good. Like fresh basil, chop that up.
Ooh, I
Mhm.
do love like a bruschetta,
Oh
little
yeah,
on a
yeah.
toasted baguette.
Hmm.
Okay.
You'll ever do stuffed tomatoes, like baked stuffed tomatoes?
I don't think so.
I've never done them baked, but I've had like a tuna salad or a chicken salad like in a tomato,
Oh
And
yeah, this is
yeah,
different. That
no,
sounds really good, but this is different from that. This is
yeah,
like
no.
you like put like kind of hollow out the middle, and you
Take
put
the
in
core
like
out.
some cheese, some garlic,
Oh,
some. You
okay.
could do if you wanted
So you
meat or
take the
something.
tomato out and put cheese in it.
Mm,
Ooh, I
yeah.
do.
Well, I mean, you can vary how much you core it out. You know, you could
Yeah.
just throw the tomato away and put a lump of cheese
A
on a
lump of
plate and bake
cheese
it.
with some sour cream.
I do a
So good.
faster version of tomato pie, but it's basically like open faced tomato grilled cheese. And
Oh
so like
yeah.
a good piece of
Oh
bread.
yeah, yeah.
You know what a good secret is? A little bit of thyme, like a powdered thyme, and put
Mm.
that on your cheese.
Jazz it up.
It's a
Like how long?
Very good.
huh? Just like want the cheese to
You said
bubble,
a
right? So
little.
like
No,
you
you
put it
said
under
like a
the
little bit of
broiler.
little time. I just didn't know how much
Oh,
time to give
oh,
it.
oh, oh. I'm
Nice.
sorry. I missed it. Okay. You're
THY.
right.
Seems like growing up, we canned
Time,
more. We canned as
man. Look
much
at you,
tomatoes as
fancy.
everything. Fancy, all the Italian seasonings in there.
Yeah.
But we canned as much tomatoes as anything. And it was amazing. I guess one thing that just screams summer and growing up to me is canned tomato juice with the seeds in.
Mm,
Mm.
His mom would
Oh shoot.
can make tomato juice that we used in everything in the wintertime, but she would do 200 or 300 quarts of whole tomatoes, which were pretty versatile. We would eat those with sugar, which was just with pasta and sugar, and it was an amazing dish. Um, she added a few other things, some butter, I think, but what's not to love about sugar and butter? But I remember just the tomato juice. She would make it for me. She would make it with seeds in. My brother, picky, younger brother, without seeds. But we drank a lot of tomato
mm,
juice in the winter, and because we had so many tomatoes, when we canned tons of tomatoes, put them up whole and
mm,
just in juice. But that just screamed summer to me when we would start
mhm,
canning the tomatoes. Did a
Mm.
lot of that and just use it in everything, basically chili, lots of soups and chilies and things like that, because it was such a versatile product that we could make a lot of for very cheap. So it
Nice.
What was
just
your
summertime.
I
thing,
found it.
Josh?
It's got a weird name. It's Turkish. It's called menemen. It's like men, all one word, like
Mhm.
MENEMEN. But it's basically like a kind of like a Dutch oven or like a skillet dish that's almost entirely like a thick tomato sauce with some like
Mhm.
peppers and onions in it. This is like a breakfast brunch thing, and then they throw a couple of eggs in it.
Oh
Sometimes if you
yeah,
include a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
sausage or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's like I got into it like a couple of years ago when I went. My sister lived in Turkey for a while and was like, "You want this?" and like pointed it out on a menu at this like Turkish place we were at. And
Hmm.
since then, it's just like when I think of like tomatoey kind of like
Mhm.
goodness, it's that, and
Yeah,
it's
because
pretty
it's like a
chill
real
too. It's very
thick, like
like yeah, and you can get like bread or something
yeah, you
like some
dip
kind of
it and
dipping
it's like
thing.
runny eggs or something like that. Like they crack the eggs in the sauce. Is that
Yeah,
how
that's
it's?
like the
Yeah.
last thing they do once it's all like
Mhm.
going and done. And there's a bunch of spices in it too, but it's very like chill for preparation too. It's like a one dish job,
Mhm.
and I always like those kind of
Oh
Once
deals.
yeah,
hot
like
It's just
wonder.
ratatouille. Ratatouille's like that, and I love a
yeah,
good
you just like
ratatouille.
throwing stuff in and then
Mhm.
last minute throw an egg or whatever in it and be like boom,
Yeah,
Mhm.
ready
Like
some
oh
to
yeah,
go.
protein.
protein. Yeah.
Yeah, bam.
Yeah, that's good.
Your
Mm.
Tomatoes are pretty
your
versatile.
spelling of that made me think of 50 Cent. Many
Eminem.
Cinnamon,
men, many men, men. You know that remember?
by
Oh, I
Remember
thought
Eminem.
of the Dr. Pepper
Wish that
like
upon me.
commercial from forever ago. Mana mana. Do, 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 do,
Oh,
do, do.
Oh,
the
nice.
Muppets. Thank you for putting that in my head. That's much
Do, do, do,
appreciated.
do.
Do you make men a minute at your home, Josh?
It's like I haven't made it since like I had family up or whatever. I usually need like some
Mhm.
kind of an excuse, but I should like. I mean, being reminded of it. I'm like, yeah, let's
It's
make
Yeah.
that
that
time.
again
It's that
soon.
time.
That's one of my
Summer
goals
is
is to
here.
can some tomatoes this year so that when I usually make my grandma's pasta sauce for
Oh,
Christmas, and I would love to do it with my
oh,
canned
nice.
tomatoes, but we'll get there eventually. But well,
Yeah,
Me
it's like
anything
too.
one of those.
else? Go ahead.
Something that another kind of tomato memory I have is one summer I was working on this farm in like Oldham County, and the people who were working, like I was working with the cattle, but there was a handful of people that were all working the market garden, and they grew a ton of tomatoes, right? And a lot of stuff was sort of seconds, essentially, that they couldn't sell at market, and so they spent like a weekend just canning. And I remember it was crazy, right? Like it was like a 3-person household, and they had one pantry that was just full of like giant wide mouth quart jars full of canned tomatoes and tomato sauce. And then like just that winter was like, I mean, twice a week, like, what can we make with this week's giant can of tomatoes?
I remember, tomato paste, tomato sauce, whole tomato. It's like every other thing was, tomatoes in it. Absolutely.
But it's like remembering when, I mean, this is very obvious, but it when I think about like canned tomatoes specifically for some reason, I think about like the fact that there was a time when people couldn't get vitamins that they needed in the winter.
Yeah,
and
right.
Tomatoes to me, right, is like that lycopene, and there's all these great vitamins in it. So in the winter, you had to have those. And, they did beans, people did everything. But that for some reason, tomatoes is really like clicks in my brain when I think about how important that was to making it through the winter a healthy human.
Not getting scurvy.
Not getting scurvy. Yeah, exactly.
I could see where it's tomatoes in the home garden, particularly, they are so productive. I know we've talked about a lot of problems today, but it really is, if you have a decent growing year and a decent patch of earth, they're a highly productive crop. That you can get a lot of fruit for, a modest amount of effort. So really,
there's a reason we have made this plant so helpless and still care for it.
Yes, and still we love it. I wonder what the first person that I always wonder, like the first person that ever ate a watermelon or a tomato. Like, here's this deadly looking bright red, which in nature is a danger color. Just to eat that, be like, I would like to know their story. What motivated you to eat this?
Do you think they gave it to their least favorite goat first?
Maybe.
Like the animals, they didn't die, and then they're like, I want that. Don't feed that to the animal.
And the animals are scarfing it down. They're like, wait, there may be something to this. So I wonder what was going through their mind when they ate this squishy. This,
just go for it. Just go for it.
It's fine. You're right. It's probably a dare. Two cavemen were like, "Hey, dare you to eat that?" Okay. Yeah. He's like, man, this is not bad.
One thing I would say to somebody who's maybe growing tomatoes for the first time or has been growing tomatoes for a while and has struggled with it, if you went with the heirloom varieties because you thought it was really cool, which it is, really flavorful, which they are, but you've struggled, there is no shame in going maybe next year, or I guess we're a little late this year, but to try it again, to try something that's a hybrid that has some disease resistance bred into it. Again, this is not genetic engineering is a whole other topic, and we can talk about that another time maybe, but this isn't even that. This is just selective breeding of a thing like we've done with dogs and a number of other, pretty much everything that we have that we cultivate. And so if you don't rather than give up on tomatoes and say you can't grow them or just have another frustrating year where the whole plant looks like it went up in flames with blight, try something that has a little bit of disease resistance built into it. Because even those like really mainstay, typical varieties, when grown in the backyard, picked vine ripened, they're still incredibly delicious. And so that would just be something, I think, if you've had trouble with them, speaking from experience.
And if you're going for like a sauce, one of the best sauces I ever had that was like homemade was from essentially a hybrid of like San Marzano and Roma, and it was a very sturdy, like potent plant. And it's one of those ones where I don't, usually people want to brag about their heirlooms and stuff like that, and it's like San Marzano is like my G. Even though it's a commercial hybrid.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Patron saint of my belly.
Yeah. Well, and that's another point of like know what you want to do with them. So if you're a fresh tomato eater, or you maybe you just want to can them whole for tossing in a soup or something, that's a different than if you're wanting to make sauce. Like there is a reason there are sauce tomatoes, right? Because they don't have the texture of them is different, and also some of those flavor complexities come out more when you're cooking them. So it might not be the best fresh tomato. It's still gonna be good. You're still gonna want to eat it, but it might not be the best for on your sandwich. But it will be great in a sauce. So kind of think about what you might want to do, and maybe you can have 2 plants. There you go, 1 or 2. It's okay.
We didn't shout them out today, but shout out to the cherry tomatoes.
Love eating of the tomato world.
Love eating them, hate picking them, because there's 1 bajillion of them, aka Tommy Toes. For those who know, they know.
Oh yeah.
But
If
yeah,
there's one, there's 1,000.
I
Yeah.
grew up calling them cherry tomatoes or grape tomatoes or whatever, but they're just man, they're so good.
Sun gold tomatoes are
Mm.
so tasty. In fact, if you have a kid that doesn't like, that's always what we tell people who like are doing gardens for like school gardens or something like that. We're always like, put sun gold tomatoes in. They will want to eat them. They will pick them. They will eat them, and they will start liking tomatoes. So that's like a really easy way to get your kid to start wanting to eat tomatoes. So
Gateway Tommy Toe.
That's it.
Don't like that. don't like that. But awesome. Well,
If you eat enough sun gold, you'll warm up to it, maybe.
Eventually.
I don't know. Tommy Toes just sounds a little.
Grew up calling them that. That's what they were. That's what they were.
Oh man. All right, cool. Any lasting words of wisdom for the July tomato?
Enjoy.
No.
Enjoy them. Yeah, enjoy them
Enjoy
while they
them.
last. They're gone too quickly.
It's a
They're
taste
like,
of summer, people.
isn't that what people say about kids? I wouldn't know, but I'm like, the tomatoes are gone too fast. But
Yeah, it's a brief window. That's what makes it so beautiful, though, right? It's a very romantic notion that it's so ephemeral, just like our
Unless
youth.
you can them, and then that's immortality.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a cryo chamber.
Prometheus has pulled the
it's
power
all
of
coming
fire
together
down from the
now.
gods and canned these tomatoes. And for that, we chained him to a rock forevermore to be attacked by the black vultures from last episode.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to it, go check it out. There was a lot of death at the beginning, but I swear it'll be good.
Pull it out,
yeah, like a Greek mythology level of death. So
Yeah.
appropriate.
An epic level.
It's cool. Most
All
of you
right,
probably
save
listened
us,
to-
Alexis. Save us from ourselves, from me mainly.
All right. Well, if you all have any ideas for future episodes, please feel free to reach out. You can reach us via email in the show notes. You can follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast, and you can send us a message on there. Let us know, and we do honestly look at them, and we'll say that would be a good episode, or ooh, we can bring on a specialist to talk about that, or somebody just way cooler than us to bring that up. And so, yeah. We're welcome. You're welcome. Please bring them more. So anyways, we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and that you'll join us next time. Have a great one.